There's a dirty secret in beauty, and it's buried in your product's footprint. Because behind every face cream and shampoo lies a data problem that no one wants to talk about. And we know the beauty industry has an impact, but ask even the most committed brands to show you the numbers and things start to fall apart. Because the truth is, most companies don't actually know what's in their supply chain, let alone how to measure its environmental impact. Now, this isn't just a case of bad record keeping, it's systemic. The industry relies on tens of thousands of ingredients, a spider web of global suppliers, and wildly inconsistent data maturity. One brand might know the origin of every single rose petal in their formulations, and another one can't tell you where their caps come from. And yet both of those brands want to call themselves sustainable. But without numbers, it's all just narrative. So today's conversation here on the podcast is about what happens when you try to actually measure beauty's impact. Not with marketing slogans or labels, but with cold, hard data. It's technical, it's ambitious, and it might just be the most important work happening in sustainable beauty right now. Welcome to Green Beauty Conversations, in which I challenge the beauty industry to become sustainable, champion independent and green beauty, and encourage you to join me in making beauty better. I'm your host, Lorraine Dallmeier. I'm a chartered environmentalist, biologist, and the CEO of award-winning online organic cosmetic formulation school, Formula Botanica. We have tens of thousands of students in over 190 countries around the world who study with us to become organic beauty formulators and entrepreneurs. Visit our website at formulabotanica.com to try our free online formulation course. And if you want to be the first person to know what's happening in green beauty, make sure you subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app. So in today's episode, I'm joined by Evan Peters, the Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Fairglow, the environmental measurement platform built specifically for the cosmetics industry. With a background spanning environmental law, data science, and sustainability innovation, Evan brings a unique perspective to the challenge of quantifying beauty's impact. Fairglow empowers brands to move beyond vague claims by measuring emissions across the full life cycle of their products, no matter how complex or incomplete the data might be. The platform aims to become a go-to tool for companies looking to back up their sustainability strategies with real numbers and to drive genuine change. Hi, Evan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Passed our audio kerfuffles earlier, so I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Everyone can hear you. So that's all we need for this episode. So that's great. So let's start off with, what is Fairglow and what problem are you trying to solve in the beauty industry?
So Fairglow is an environmental management platform for the cosmetics and beauty industry. Succinctly, the problem we're trying to solve is sustainability has meant a lot of different things to the cosmetics industry, but it hasn't meant quantified results for a long time. And what we're bringing to the beauty industry through a thing called life cycle assessment, which I'm sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with. But to be brief, it's this very thorough quantified assessment of the life cycle of a product. We're using that at scale to bring quantified results to the beauty industry. And what I mean by that is saying, how sustainable is my product really? And we can put numbers to it, the water usage that went into the production, the carbon usage, the CO2 amounts, all these environmental impacts tracked with numbers. And with those numbers, you can do meaningful comparisons, you can make meaningful reductions.
Amazing. Well, what a fantastic tool to have created. And I'm sure, we'll delve a little bit more into how it works in a minute. So you didn't start out in cosmetics, did you? Can you share a little bit about what led you to co-found Fairglow and what your big mission is?
Yeah, so my background was in a lot of data science and environmental regulation. So one of my first forays into this field was calculating ecotoxicity for personal care products, creating these algorithms to estimate how toxic were some of these things to fish when it went down the drain. A little later on, I worked at a startup that did carbon measurements. And after leaving that, I wanted to combine these two disciplines. So if I can estimate these ecotoxicities, I think I can estimate some of these other environmental impacts that are super important to measure. And we looked at the beauty industry and realized there's a huge demand. People want this desperately for this quantified results, and no one's really filling this demand. It's really hard to get straight answers on a lot of these questions, like is this ingredient more sustainable than that ingredient? And so that led us to found Fairglow almost 3 years ago, my co-founders and I.
Amazing. So you're based in Paris, right? Where's the company based?
We're based in Paris, yes. I'm an American in Paris. The Parisians never let me forget it.
Just like Emily in Paris, I'm sure. So let's go a little bit into life cycle assessment in a little bit more detail, because some of our listeners may never have heard about it before. You introduced it briefly at the beginning, but what is it exactly? How does it apply to a cosmetic?
Yeah, so life cycle assessment is like double book accounting for finance, but applied to the environmental world. What you do is you take into account everything that went into the production of the product. And one of the key elements that's unique is you want to follow it through the entire life cycle. And so a phrase that's typically applied is cradle to grave, meaning from the inception and birth of this product until, okay, I'm no longer using it, I've put it into the waste stream. And you even look at how elements return back to nature, return back into another package, etc. So what that means is we will look at each and every ingredient, the origin of its production, the origin of the raw materials of those ingredients as well. And we take that into account, measure it, add it to a product's final impact. We'll do the same for the packaging, do the same for the manufacturing, distribution. We even cover the use phase and end of life. So these are these six kind of main life cycle categories of a typical cosmetic product. We've calculated over 50,000 life cycle analyses of products.
Wow.
It's fun to look at the data in real time and be like, these shampoos on average, the use phase dominates the global warming category, the CO2 emissions category, because you're taking these showers and showers heat water. And there's these assumptions based in saying each shower is taking all this gas to heat the water. And then you'll look at a different category, say skin moisturizer, and the impacts may come in a different mix, more from ingredients, more from packaging, etc.
Wow. That's a lot of work has gone into that by the sounds of things.
Yes. There's a ton of work because there's two main problems in life cycle assessment. One is finding the data. Even the best brands are going to be missing a ton of data that's relevant and needed to do a life cycle assessment. So Fairglow has done a lot of work on being able to have a brand or a formulator basically just dump a bunch of PDFs into a bucket for us, a bunch of communications, Excels, whatever. And this is one of the fascinating elements of AI right now, is we're able to give it some instructions and pull out the relevant information. And then the second thing that Fairglow has done is making use of that relevant information in a quantified way. So before, if you just told someone, well, I bought this glycerin from Germany and I'm pretty sure they got it from canola oil before, from the esterification of some raw material. Before, that wouldn't be meaningful in a life cycle assessment way. But what we have done is say, okay, you can tell us these little snippets, these little, they're not a full story, but there's stuff we don't want to lose there. And what we have done is created all these algorithms to make the best assumptions on the total impact according to these kind of incomplete stories, these incomplete histories of each ingredient, of your packaging as well. So those are the two pieces that Fairglow really brings to life for cosmetic products, is this gathering of the data and then making it useful ultimately.
Amazing. I mean, it must have taken a long time to get all that data together, because the cosmetics industry is huge. It uses tens of thousands of ingredients. How long did it take you guys to build that sort of database? So
this is where my previous background came into use, is we had already been working on a similar thing. So this was, 8 years ago, basically. And we had some clear, obvious refinements to make it apply directly to cosmetics and these new fields. We weren't measuring carbon before, we were measuring aquatic ecotoxicity. There's definitely some parallels there. And it would be wrong for me to say that the work is done. We're always learning and we're constantly improving.
Yeah,
but it took a long while. I'll say that.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine that it must have taken a long time. And as you say, I mean, there's constantly new information coming out onto the market. I mean, the beauty industry is historically and still very opaque. It doesn't like to open the doors to anything. It's extremely secretive about its formulations. Did you come up against any barriers with companies not willing to share information?
Yes, just about every time we do these. So it's one of the trade-offs, which is I want to know how sustainable my product is, but I don't want to tell you much about it. And I equate that to like trying an accountant saying, I'll do your taxes and I'll do it just by like looking through your trash. Don't give me your salary forms. You wouldn't really trust that accountant. If he said, no, don't worry, I'll just look through the trash that you threw out. So there is a necessary trade-off, right? Accuracy requires this precision, and precision requires transparency for these companies. What we typically do there is say, if you don't want to, we've calculated so many impact categories, we can say we can give you some averages for this category, but the more averages you use, the less useful it is for making reductions, right?
That makes sense.
And that's kind of ultimately our goal, is to say we want people's decisions to have quantified impact. When someone's formulating and said, I'm going to choose something else, we want them to know the impact of that result. If people are saying, I'm going to make a more sustainable decision, well, we want them to capture that delta of that decision, whether it's knowingly choosing someone who's going to ship something by sea and knowing that that's going to add another 4 weeks to your supply chain, but choosing that. And then I want you to capture that delta. And we already have people, brands and manufacturers using our tool to say, I want to reduce by 20% here. How do we go about it? And we let them move around some of the elements of the supply chain, which is, like you said, extremely complicated. We don't deign to tell people exactly how to formulate their products. They're smarter than us. They know their customers better than us. But we want them, when they do make those decisions, to say, cool, that's less, that's more.
Yeah. And of course, the more accurate you can be, the better the changes and impacts you can make to improve what you're doing, of course. So how do your algorithms deal with that missing data, those gaps? Because there must be gaps in the data. So how does that work exactly?
It works in different ways depending on the life cycle we're looking at. So with ingredients, which I think your listeners will be most interested, and it's also the most interesting and complex problem here, because there's 29,354 INCIs based on our last read from the database. And not all of those ingredients are well measured. In fact, less than 1% are well covered in emission factor databases. And obviously, they can all be produced in a variety of different ways. So what we've done is created an average of each of these ingredients. So if we take sodium lauryl sarkinosate, for example, which is a biodegradable surfactant, it's kind of a mild surfactant that maybe some of your listeners have used. We have what we call a recipe for that ingredient. It involves several different raw materials, which they themselves have life cycles. And all of this is modeled in our database. Basically, we say, we assume this reaction, we assume this amount of transport for the raw materials, we assume this yield percentage in this reaction. That just sits in our database. When we work with a supplier or a formulator or a brand, we will say, do you know anything about your sodium lauryl sarkinosate? Anything at all? Just shoot and say, I bought it from Germany. Okay, cool. That gets tossed into the algorithm, and all the adjustments made to this recipe are done. If someone says, I actually know the exact amount of heat energy I did to make this product, I know that it was shipped by truck in this amount of kilometers, and I know that the packaging was reused, awesome. That goes in the recipe as well. And now you basically have a very precise life cycle analysis. So the key element here is that we are flexible to work on this sliding scale of, I don't know anything, to I could tell you what the guy ate for lunch when he was mixing the product. And we think that's a key value add for us here is this ability to be flexible to our clients' data literacy, data maturity.
That's amazing, because in effect you're then sort of crowdsourcing the information rather than having to send someone down to the factory to follow the guy while he has his lunch, while he's making the sodium rolls.
Yeah, exactly. And we've just found that if you don't have that flexibility, you're going to end up making these assumptions anyway. So one of the key moments, maybe 5 years ago, I started reading a lot of these life cycle assessments, which are, you pay a consultant thousands of euros and then you wait weeks and weeks for something to happen. But I kept seeing when I got my hands on these reports that it was filled with these assumptions anyway. Because even when you send the person to the factory and you send out all these forms asking for data, people are filling them in incomplete anyway. And so we said, let's acknowledge that data is missing and do our best around that problem. And that way we can get answers in people's hands instantly. And if they have more data, perfect, they have more accuracy.
That makes perfect sense. I find this fascinating. I started my career as an environmental consultant. My goodness, where are we? 22 years ago. And one of the first things I worked on was LCA, and there were always gaps in the process then as well. What's one of the most surprising things that you've discovered in this process, perhaps about ingredients or sourcing or anything really to do with how you've built Fairglow?
Sure. I mean, initially, the most surprising thing was just how the value chain works in cosmetics. I had a ton to learn about who talks to who's the decision makers on things like that. But surprising factoids about environmental information are everywhere. I think a very common one is a common one that we encounter is the fact that a lot of synthetic ingredients end up being more environmentally friendly on several categories than the natural ones. And that's a tough one to swallow, right? Because in my head, I love the idea of this growing your ingredients and stewarding the land in this way. But the fact is, if you measure on a global warming, so measuring CO2 equivalents, some synthetics tend to be more streamlined and more efficient.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, actually. And we were talking before we started recording about the fact that the word sustainable is being co-opted now, and it's often being used to talk about things that are natural or vegan or ethical or anything vaguely positive. And people do make that assumption about it's natural, it was grown outdoors, therefore it must be better for the environment. But actually, until you've quantified it, you simply don't know, do you? Yeah,
exactly. It matters what you're measuring. So I had a funny moment when I was giving a talk to some ecologists about ecotoxicity, and we were talking about marine pollutants. And I said, "What does that mean to you?" And someone in the audience said, "Oh, it's like those little plastic rings that you get a 6-pack of beer or soda from. That's a marine pollutant." And I was like, "Well, you know what? You're right. So the turtles get their head caught in it, and it's terrible." But it's completely not what is being measured. We're measuring these numbers of how toxic things are to living beings. And if you want to measure whether something's organic or vegan, that's a fine measurement. That's your rubric, right? But if you want numbers, the world agrees life cycle analysis is the way to go. And I believe too, if you can't measure it, there's no way you can really reduce it. So
that's very true.
So I don't want to throw any shade on the concept of naturality, on vegan, on bio, on organics. If that's what you want to optimize, go for it. But if you want to optimize on the water footprint, the acidification footprint, the eutrophication, the climate change, then you need to do another approach, and that's life cycle assessment.
It doesn't mean not to use natural ingredients either. It just means knowing your numbers. And if you're using an ingredient that you find is particularly high in impact in one particular area, then you replace it with something else. And knowledge is power after all. That's what they've always said, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So sunlight's the best disinfectant. So you just need to put some, this is a complicated industry, and we don't have a lot of data literacy on it. And that's no one's fault. It's been extremely hard until now to get these answers.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, so who is Fairglow for then? You built this platform, there's all this data behind it. Are you focused on the big players, the small brands, formulators in general? Who can use Fairglow?
So right now we're primarily a B2B business. So we're working with big manufacturers and brands, small to large. We have a platform where basically, as described earlier, people put in their data, an analysis is done, and then we yield these results to these brands and manufacturers. In terms of formulators, we have some small ingredients manufacturers who use us. We have some big ingredient manufacturers who use us. I'm trying to frame it in for your listeners, but a lot of big brands use us because there's regulations that require the overall measurements of their companies. And so using Fairglow is an excellent way to do that and get a per product footprint that you can communicate internally, externally, etc.
So how does a typical brand engage with the platform then? What do they need to bring to the table, and what do they get back?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what they bring to the table is information about their value chain. How do they make their products? What do they put in them? And that includes down to the packaging level. What's the PCR, post-consumer recycle rate of each element? What's the material? Where'd you buy it from? And we repeat that for the ingredients. Now, this is a ton of data, right? This is hundreds and hundreds of little pieces of data per product. And that's why one of the key elements was this ability to just have our users say, throw it in the buckets, we'll piece it all together. And so that's what they bring. So a lot of people just do these extracts from their ERP, a lot of Excels, tons of PDFs, which get ingested basically and managed. And then what they get is a footprint per product in a very user-friendly fashion. Typically LCA, as an environmental consultant, has had these very bulky, tough to understand software tools.
Yes, I remember it well.
Where there's, all these arrows pointing everywhere, and it's, Windows 98 style. But what we've done is taken the power of that, but tried to make it a little more accessible and framed it all around cosmetic products, right? So you think of your products differently. So you think of them in this formulation. So when you go through our platform, you can go into the formulation area, you can go into the packaging area, you can go into the distribution and inventory area and move values around as they fit your value chain. And then what you get there is you have a tool where you can easily make changes to your product. If you want to do product development, essentially, you can say, you know what, I wonder, we're talking about whether we get rid of secondary packaging, whether we sell direct bottles. And then someone says, that our brand would take a hit, but then the sustainability team can now say, well, this is the reduction we would get out of that. And you could say, if we reduce secondary packaging, we might need to increase the thickness of our bottle. All of those values you can play with and see the actual impact. So you're not going blind anymore.
No, that's a huge amount of data and incredibly beneficial for brands, I can imagine. So your core mission is carbon reduction in this cosmetics sector. And where do you think the biggest reductions can come from?
Ooh, that's a great question. The biggest reductions are probably going to come from the low-hanging fruit to start with, which is going to be a lot of distribution methods. One startling thing that I learned is a lot of high-end products are transported by plane. And the reason was startling. I thought it was just going to be a timeliness fashion, but I guess it's actually just far more secure. Plane transport has a far lower spoilage. I mean, spoilage is another thing, is, a cosmetic product will have 6 to 18 months, right? And if 2 of those months are on a boat, that's not so nice.
No, fair enough.
So low-hanging fruit like that, I think packaging systems that are overly bloated with low restitution or high restitution rates, meaning like it's hard to get the product out. There's different amounts of, for shampoo, for example, the average restitution is 8% or so. That means really? 8% of the product remains in the bottle on average, based on studies done in Europe. And, toothpaste has some other different restitution. So a lot of companies are working on reducing that and making sure that they have systems that get 100% of the product out, that don't use more packaging than they need to. And then you have some brands going the opposite way, saying like, it creates this luxury feel to have all this packaging, but obviously the impact goes up.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, there are many quick wins to be made there by the sounds of things. I had no idea about the restitution. I will be looking into that for future podcast episodes.
I'll shoot you some cool PDFs after that.
Thank you very much. So in an industry that's crowded with certification schemes and labels and claims, why do you think that quantification, actually setting numbers, knowing numbers is still so rare?
Because it's hard, I think. I think because it's very difficult. And cosmetics has historically been, like you said, such an opaque industry. The exact formulations of these things are kept under lock and key. There's still wins to be had, even if you don't release your exact formulation, right? Like we said, all the packaging and distribution elements, they should be measured. But yeah, my short answer is I think it's very hard. And the longer answer is maybe consumer demand hasn't been there for quantification, right? It's simpler for a consumer to say, well, it's got natural elements. And that goes with the preconceived notion of naturality that even I had until 3 years ago. So until consumers really start demanding that quantification, I think people will be satisfied with their badges.
That is a big ask of consumers, to be honest. I guess it probably has to be led from the brands, but one could say that in many different sectors with many different environmental issues.
Sure.
Final question. You've worked in cosmetics now for a while through Fairglow. If there's one thing you could change about the way sustainability is handled in cosmetics, what would you do if you had your magic wand and you could wave it?
So with my magic wand, I would completely remove the opacity of this industry. I would love to make our database free and accessible, and people just upload, I made my product like this, and there's verification for it. Each supplier has their life cycle assessment attached to every element in their product. So I would like it when, you do a technical data sheet. I think every element from the ingredients to the packaging should be associated with its life cycle assessment. And I would love for us to just think about that as a basic requirement. Tell me how you made it. And so I can now account for my impact, and I can take into account the impact of this substance when I'm making my purchasing decisions. So my magic wand would just say, and this, I wish we had this for every industry, right?
True.
Tell me how you made it. It seems like a very basic ask now, and I hope humanity moves towards this thing of saying, I want to take into account how you make these products. And I think we are. I think more and more people are saying, I want to know how it was made, and I want to take this into account. That's kind of the only way we're tackling this.
I think we are moving there. I think the questions are starting to come, and I think we need to get you that magic wand, because that sounds like a great future for the beauty industry. So Evan, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Where can our listeners find out more about you and about Fairglow and sign up potentially? Yeah,
so go to our website. It's a .fr because we're based in France, but just type in Fairglow into your search engine of choice. We have a contact form there. If people are small formulators at home, one of the best things they can do when they're buying their ingredients is just say, do you have a life cycle assessment? It doesn't need to come from Fairglow, but if they don't, then they can always just say, well, we have a scalable, easy way to do that, and suggest Fairglow do their measurements for them.
Excellent. That sounds like great advice. We'll send all the ingredient suppliers over to you as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been fascinating listening to you and everything you've built. I wish you all the very best with Fairglow, and I can't wait to see what you guys do next.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Yeah, it was really fun.
Thanks. I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Life cycle assessment, or LCA, is a big topic for beauty. Do you think the cosmetics industry is ready to properly embrace it? Leave us a comment on our social channels as both the Formula Botanica team and I love hearing from you. And if you want to hear some more episodes about the topics we discussed today, please do delve back into the podcast archives. There are so many episodes for you to go and listen to. So some great examples include episode 163, in which I interviewed Anisha Gupta of Bluebird Climate, which is now part of Repurpose Global, all about the LCA tool that they've developed. Or episode 87, in which I interviewed Formula Botanica graduates Elsie and Dominica from Bybee Beauty to ask them how we can sink carbon while selling skincare. There is a wealth of information in our old episodes, and I do encourage you to go back and listen to them. Thank you for joining Evan and I for this latest episode of Green Beauty Conversations. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do leave us a 5-star review so that other people can enjoy these conversations too. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever your favorite podcast app is, and stay tuned for the next episode. Follow Formula Botanica at Formula Botanica on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest, LinkedIn. We are everywhere. And come and give me a follow at Lorraine Dallmeier on Instagram and LinkedIn. Visit our website at formulabotanica.com and sign up for our free online formulation course today.